Donald Trump has questioned Kamala Harris's racial identity during a heated exchange at a convention for black journalists. Trump falsely claimed the vice president and presumptive Democratic nominee had not emphasized her Asian American heritage until recently when he claimed she became a black person. "I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black and now she wants to be known as black," he said at the National Association of Black Journalists convention in Chicago on Wednesday. "So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?" Ms. Harris said Trump's remarks were the same old show of divisiveness and disrespect. "The American people deserve better," she told a meeting of the historically black sorority Sigma Gamma Rho in Houston. "We deserve a leader who understands that our differences do not divide us. They are an essential source of our strength." Ms. Harris is the first black and Asian American vice president with Indian and Jamaican-born parents. She attended Howard University, a historically black university, and joined the predominantly black Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. She became a member of Congressional Black Caucus after entering the Senate in 2017. Trump's claims prompted a heated exchange with ABC News correspondent Rachel Scott, one of the moderators of the Chicago event. "I respect either one," the Republican said in reference to Harris's racial identity. "But she obviously doesn't because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn, and she became a black person." White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said, "No one has any right to tell someone who they are, how they identify. That is no one's right." "Who appointed Donald Trump the arbiter of blackness?" asked Representative Richie Torres of New York. He described Trump as a relic of a racist past. The Republican nominee and former president has a history of attacking his opponents on the basis of race. He falsely accused Barack Obama, the country's first black president, of not being born in the U.S. Trump attacked the former UN ambassador and his Republican primary opponent Nikki Haley by falsely claiming she could not be president because her parents were not U.S. citizens when she was born. Ms. Harris has faced a series of attacks since becoming the presumptive Democratic nominee. Republicans have criticized the decision, saying she was chosen only because of her race. Tim Burchett, a Republican congressman from Tennessee, called her a DEI vice president, a reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. On Wednesday, Scott pushed Trump to clarify whether he believed Ms. Harris was a DEI hire. He replied, "I really don't know. Could be." Ms. Harris has described growing up engaged with her Indian heritage and often visited the country. Her mother also immersed her two daughters in the black culture of Oakland, California, where she was raised, she said. Trump also attacked Ms. Harris's credentials during the discussion, saying she had failed her bar exam early in her legal career. His comments were met with murmurs from the crowd. "I'm just giving you the facts. She didn't pass her bar exam, and she didn't think she would pass it, and she didn't think she was going to ever pass it, and I don't know what happened. Maybe she passed it," he said. Ms. Harris graduated from the University of California Hastings College of Law in 1989. The New York Times reported that she failed her first attempt and passed at the second. The State Bar of California says less than half of those who sit the test pass on the first attempt. The Chicago discussion began with a contentious back and forth between Scott and the former president. Trump accused the journalist of giving a very rude introduction when she began the conversation asking about his past criticism of black people. She cited Trump calling black journalists' questions stupid and racist, and that he had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. "I love the black population of this country. I've done so much for the black population of this country," he responded. The former president criticized the conversation hours later on his social media platform. "The questions were rude and nasty, often in the form of a statement, but we crushed it," he said. "Subscribe to our channel for more updates." A 17-year-old has been charged with the murder of 3 girls at a dance class in Southport. Baby King, 6, Elsie Stankham, 7, and 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguiar died after a knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed event in the Merseyside town on Monday. The teenager, who is due to appear at Liverpool City Magistrates Court later on Thursday, has also been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder. 8 other children and 2 adults who were at the event in the Hart Space Centre were injured, with some still believed to be in a critical condition. The defendant, who cannot be named because of his age, has also been charged with the possession of a bladed article. Merseyside police announced the charges during a press conference just after midnight. Ursula Doyle, Deputy Chief Crown Prosecutor for the Crown Prosecution Service, Mersey Cheshire, said, "We remind all concerned that criminal proceedings against the defendant are active and that he has the right to a fair trial. It is extremely important that there should be no reporting, commentary, or sharing of information online which could in any way prejudice these proceedings. Our thoughts remain with the families of all of those affected by these harrowing events." Chief Constable of Merseyside Police Serena Kennedy said, "Whilst these charges are a significant milestone within this investigation, this remains very much a live investigation, and we continue to work with our partners from Lancashire Police and Counter-Terrorism Police in the North West." The summer holiday dance class on Hart Street in Southport was being held for primary school children aged 6 to 10. Police were called to reports of a stabbing there just before 11:50 BST on Monday. When officers arrived, they found that multiple people, many of whom were children, had been subjected to a ferocious attack and had suffered serious injuries, Ms. Kennedy said. Police believe a person armed with a knife walked into the building and attacked those inside. 2 adults were critically injured bravely, trying to protect the children from the attack, police said. In a tribute issued through police, Bebe's family said, "No words can describe the devastation that has hit our family as we try to deal with the loss of our little girl, Bebe." Meanwhile, the family of Alice said, "Keep smiling and dancing like you love to do, our princess. Like we said before to you, you're always our princess, and no one would change that. Love from your hero, Daddy and Mummy." Separately, more than 100 people were arrested in a protest in central London on Wednesday night following the deaths in Southport, the Metropolitan Police said. The Met said it made arrests for a range of offences, including violent disorder, assault on an emergency worker, and breach of protest conditions on Wednesday evening. It followed separate unrest in Southport on Tuesday, which came hours after a peaceful vigil was attended by thousands to remember the girls who died. A large group of protesters attacked the front of a mosque, throwing bricks, bottles, fireworks and rocks, while police officers used riot shields to defend themselves as wheelie bins were hurled towards them. A police vehicle was also set on fire. Merseyside police said more than 50 police officers were hurt in a sustained and vicious attack. The force said the violence was believed to have involved English Defence League supporters. It added that those behind the violence had been fired up by social media posts, which incorrectly suggested an Islamist link to Monday's stabbing. In a message widely shared on social media, Elsie's mother Jenny Stankham condemned the violence. "This is the only thing that I will write, but please stop the violence in Southport tonight," she wrote. "The police have been nothing but heroic these last 24 hours, and we don't need this." Several officers were also injured in separate disorder in Hartlepool on Wednesday, Cleveland police said, after violence broke out in the town. Disorder was also reported in Manchester and Aldershot. No arrests have been made. Following the incidents, the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer will meet senior policing leaders in Downing Street on Thursday. The Prime Minister's press office said the meeting would be to offer them the government's full backing following multiple high-profile incidents of extreme violence and public disorder on our streets. He will say that the shocking events in Southport this week serve as a reminder of the bravery of our emergency service workers and the vitally important work they do to keep the public safe, it said. While the right to peaceful protest must be protected at all costs, he will be clear that criminals who exploit that right in order to sow hatred and carry out violent acts will face the full force of the law. Subscribe for more updates. Hamas says its political leader Ismail Haniyeh has been killed in an Israeli attack in the Iranian capital. According to Iranian media, an airstrike hit a building for war veterans in Tehran, where Haniyeh was staying at around 2 Foyot 22:30 GMT. Haniyeh, 62, was widely considered Hamas's overall leader and played a key role in negotiations aimed at reaching a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Israel has not commented, but it has promised to destroy Hamas following the 7 October attack on southern Israel, which killed 1,200 people. On Wednesday, the Israeli government's press office posted a photo of Haniyeh on social media, captioned with the word eliminated, which it has subsequently deleted. According to Hamas, Haniyeh was in Tehran to take part in the inauguration ceremony of the new Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, who was sworn in on Tuesday. His death could now delay efforts to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza, as he was a critical interlocutor in the negotiations brokered by Qatar, the US, and Egypt. Several countries, including Iraq, Turkey, Russia, and Qatar, have condemned the attack. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the assassination was something we were not aware of or involved in. Hamas's armed wing said Haniyeh's death would take the battle to new dimensions and have major repercussions. Iran's leader Ayatollah Khamenei has vowed harsh punishment against Israel and has declared 3 days of national mourning. Haniyeh's death comes just hours after Israel claimed it killed the top military commander of Hezbollah, a Lebanon-based group also backed by Iran. Israel said it killed Fuad Shukr in an airstrike in retaliation for a rocket attack in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights at the weekend. Hezbollah has not yet confirmed that a senior commander was killed by an Israeli attack in Beirut on Tuesday, but has said Shukr was in a building which was targeted. Since the incident, the civil defense teams have been working to lift the rubble steadily but slowly due to the situation of the destroyed classes, and we are still waiting for the result, a statement released by the group on Wednesday said. Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant said the country was not seeking to escalate with Hezbollah, but was prepared to handle all scenarios. Haniyeh was a prominent member of Hamas in the late 1980s and was imprisoned by Israel for 3 years in 1989 as it cracked down on the first Palestinian uprising. He was then exiled in 1992 to a no-man's land between Israel and Lebanon, along with a number of Hamas leaders. Haniyeh was appointed Palestinian Prime Minister in 2006 by President Mahmoud Abbas after Hamas won the most seats in national elections, but he was dismissed a year later after the group ousted Mr. Abbas' Fatah party from the Gaza Strip in a week of deadly violence. Haniyeh rejected his sacking as unconstitutional, stressing that his government would not abandon its national responsibilities towards the Palestinian people and continued to rule in Gaza. He was elected head of Hamas's political bureau in 2017. In 2018, the US Department of State designated Haniyeh a terrorist. He had lived in Qatar for the past several years. His official funeral will be held on Thursday in Tehran, with the burial taking place on Friday in Doha, Qatar, according to a senior Hamas official. Following Hamas's attack on 7th of October, which killed 1,200 people, Israel responded with an ongoing military operation in the Gaza Strip, which has killed at least 39,445 people, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Subscribe for more updates. 3 of the men accused of plotting the 11th of September 2001 attacks on the US have entered into a pre-trial agreement, the Department of Defense says. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Walid Mohammed Salih Mubarak bin Atash, and Mustafa Ahmed Adam al-Hawsawi have been held at the U.S. Navy base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for years without going to trial. Details of the deal have not been announced, but U.S. news outlets say the men will plead guilty in exchange for the prosecution agreeing not to seek the death penalty. Nearly 3,000 people in New York, Virginia, and Pennsylvania were killed in the attacks, which sparked the War on Terror and the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Brett Eagleson, the president of 9/11 Justice, an organization that represents 9/11 survivors and relatives of victims, said in a statement provided to the BBC that the families are deeply troubled by these plea deals. He said the process lacked transparency and urged the authorities to pursue more information on the role of Saudi Arabia in the attacks. Terry Strada, who lost her husband Tom, told the BBC's Today programme, "It was a gut punch to hear that there was a plea deal today that was giving the detainees in Guantanamo Bay what they want." Ms. Strada, the national chair of the campaign group 9/11's Families United, added, "This is a victory for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other two. It's a victory for them," she said. The 9/11's attacks were the deadliest assault on U.S. soil since the 1941 Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, where 2,400 people were killed. The plea deal was first announced in a letter sent by prosecutors to the families of victims, according to the New York Times. It said the plea before a military court could come as early as next week. In its announcement, the U.S. Defense Department said the specific terms and conditions of the pre-trial agreements are not available to the public at this time. The men have been accused of a litany of charges, including attacking civilians, murder in violation of the laws of war, hijacking, and terrorism. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is widely considered the architect of the attack, in which hijackers seized passenger planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon outside of Washington. A fourth plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. Mohammed, a U.S.-educated engineer, was captured along with Housawi in Pakistan in March 2003. Prosecutors argued that he brought his idea of hijacking and flying planes into U.S. buildings to al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, and later helped recruit and train some of the hijackers. He was subjected to a number of enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, simulated drowning, at least 183 times before the practice was banned by the U.S. government. The trial has been delayed for so long, partly because of fears that the so-called brutal interrogation techniques, which critics say amounted to torture, could have undermined the evidence against the detainees. "This is the least bad deal in the real world that would ever happen," national security analyst Peter Bergen told CNN. In September, the Biden administration reportedly rejected the terms of a plea deal with 5 men held at the U.S. Navy base in Cuba, including Mohammed. The men had reportedly sought a guarantee from the president that they would not be kept in solitary confinement and would have access to trauma treatment. The White House National Security Council said that the president's office was told on Wednesday of the new deal and had played no role in negotiations. 15 of the 19 plane hijackers were Saudi nationals, and families are bringing a lawsuit against the kingdom, which denies any involvement. Republicans were quick to attack the Biden administration for striking a deal with the accused. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell condemned the move as a revolting abdication of the government's responsibility to defend America and provide justice. "The only thing worse than negotiating with terrorists is negotiating with them after they are in custody," he said. What happened on 9/11? On Tuesday, the 11th of September, 2001, suicide attackers seized U.S. passenger jets and crashed them into 2 New York skyscrapers, killing thousands of people. The attack remains one of the most traumatic events of the century, not only for Americans, but also for the world. What were the targets? 4 planes flying over the eastern U.S. were seized simultaneously by small teams of hijackers. They were then used as giant, guided missiles to crash into landmark buildings in New York and Washington. 2 planes struck the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York. The first hit the North Tower at 8:46 Eastern Time, 12:46 GMT. The second crashed into the South Tower at 9:03. The buildings were set on fire, trapping people on the upper floors and wreathing the city in smoke. In less than 2 hours, both 110-story towers collapsed in massive clouds of dust. At 9:37, the third plane destroyed the western face of the Pentagon, the giant headquarters of the U.S. military just outside the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. The fourth plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania at 10:03 after passengers fought back. It is thought the hijackers had meant to attack the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. How many people died? In all, 2,977 people, not counting the 19 hijackers, lost their lives, most of them in New York. All 246 passengers and crew aboard the four planes were killed. At the Twin Towers, 2,606 people died, then or later, of injuries. At the Pentagon, 125 people were killed. The youngest victim was 2-year-old Christine Lee Hansen, who died on one of the planes with her parents Peter and Sue. The oldest was 82-year-old Robert Norton, who was on another plane with his wife Jacqueline, en route to a wedding. When the first plane struck, an estimated 17,400 people were in the towers. Nobody survived above the impact zone in the North Tower, but 18 managed to escape from the floors above the impact zone in the South Tower. Citizens of 77 different countries were among the casualties. New York City lost 441 first responders. Thousands of people were injured or later developed illnesses connected to the attacks, including firefighters who had worked in toxic debris. Who were the attackers? An Islamist extremist network called Al-Qaeda planned the attacks from Afghanistan. Led by Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda blamed the US and its allies for conflicts in the Muslim world. 19 people carried out the hijackings, working in 3 teams of 5 and 1 of 4 on the plane which crashed in Pennsylvania. Each group included someone who had received pilot training. This was carried out at flying schools in the US itself. 15 hijackers were Saudis, like bin Laden himself. 2 were from the United Arab Emirates, 1 was from Egypt, and 1 was from Lebanon. How did the US respond? Less than a month after the attacks, President George W. Bush led an invasion of Afghanistan, supported by an international coalition, to eradicate al-Qaeda and hunt down bin Laden. However, it was not until 2011 that US troops finally located and killed bin Laden in neighboring Pakistan. The alleged planner of the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was arrested in Pakistan in 2003. He has been held in US custody at Guantanamo Bay since then and is still awaiting trial. Al-Qaeda still exists. It is strongest in sub-Saharan Africa, but even now has members inside Afghanistan. US troops left Afghanistan this year after nearly 20 years, stoking fears from many that the Islamist network could make a comeback. The legacy of 9/11s. Flight safety was tightened around the world in the years following 9/11s. In the US, the Transportation Security Administration was created to beef up security at airports and on planes. It took more than 8 months to clean up Ground Zero, the site of the fallen Twin Towers. A memorial and a museum now stands on the site, and buildings have risen up again to a different design. The completed centerpiece, One World Trade Center, or Freedom Tower, stands even higher, 1,776 feet, 541 m, than the original North Tower, which was 1,368 feet. Reconstruction at the Pentagon took just under a year, with staff back in their offices by August 2002. In a courtroom just feet away from 9/11 suspects, this grim anniversary has meant renewed focus on the 5 suspects in detention accused of involvement in the 9/11 attacks. The men, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, have all appeared in court in Guantanamo Bay this week after an 18-month hiatus in pre-trial hearings caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Behind the glass in the viewing gallery have been a small number of relatives of victims of the attacks, some members of non-profit organizations, and a handful of journalists, all there to observe proceedings. Guantanamo Bay already feels cut off from the world, and given the magnitude of this case and weight of the horrific crimes being considered, the courtroom here feels all the more singularly alien. Walking into the courtroom for the first time was extremely emotionally powerful for me, says Dr. Elizabeth Berry, whose younger brother, Billy Burke, was one of the firemen in the North Tower when it collapsed. I wasn't quite sure what to expect because you see things in the newspapers, portrayals of the way people look, which are not really an accurate representation when you see them in the courtroom. It was very moving and very difficult, she says. Dr. Berry has attended many of the 42 pre-trial hearings in this case at Guantanamo Bay and says she specifically wanted to be here for the 20th anniversary of the attacks to feel she was supporting the team fighting for justice for her brother and nearly 3,000 others. I felt what better place to honor my brother than here with other family members. What, and with this, the prosecution team, she says. A trial like no other, it was noticeably difficult for most in the gallery to stop glancing, sometimes staring, at the defendants throughout the sessions. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, diminutive and with a henna-dyed orange beard, bounded into the courtroom the first morning to his seat beside his legal team. He and the 4 other defendants talked throughout much of the proceedings, either to their legal teams or to each other. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would often turn around for long periods, draping an arm over the back of his chair and chatting to Walid bin Attash, the defendant sitting directly behind him. The man believed to have conceived of the idea of the 9/11 attacks and overseen their planning, in animated discussion with one accused of training 2 of the hijackers. By their feet, it was noticeable that each of the 5 defendants had a large plastic tub filled with papers and files that they would often delve into. "They've got all sorts of things in there," says Alka Pradhan, a lawyer representing Ammar al-Baluchi, who is alleged to have provided logistical support to 9/11 attackers, including through money transfers. "They've got legal motions they want to talk to us about. They've got printouts from advocacy websites. Ammar, for example, will often ask us to print out recent material from his ongoing campaign with Amnesty International so he can discuss it," says Ms. Pradhan, indicating just how engaged all 5 defendants are in the direction their legal cases take. It is striking that many of the women that form part of the defense teams of the 9/11 suspects, like Alka Pradhan, wear the hijab in the courtroom in the presence of their clients. Some even cover themselves in an abaya, which they remove in sessions during which the defendants are not present. "I do it in the courtroom because several of the guys were tortured specifically by females in very specific ways. The intentional sexual humiliation by women," says Ms. Pradhan. "You can see a difference in the way they talk to you when you put the hijab on. It's not that they refuse to talk to me if I wear a hijab, and it's not that they have ever said you must wear hijab, but there is a difference in the way they interact with me," she says. "I'm glad they're so well taken care of. The 9/11 suspects are not shackled in the courtroom. They were not made to wear masks like everyone else, and their legal teams are allowed to bring them clothing deemed culturally appropriate and even paramilitary-style dress." This week, for Ramzi bin al-Shibh, the man believed to have organized one cell of the 9/11 attackers that included a camouflage jacket of the type Osama bin Laden often wore, and that his fellow defendants, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, have worn in hearings in the past. "I'm glad they're so well taken care of," says Elizabeth Berry, of the men accused of playing a part in the death of her brother, though the hurt she feels at seeing the defendants is abundantly clear. "I think we do take very good care of these guys, and it's obvious they get better healthcare than I get, but it's all part of the process. It's part of accepting that this is what has to happen in order for it to come to a resolution," says Dr. Berry. Resolution seems a very long way off. After all, a start date for the trial of these men has yet to be set. This week we heard defense teams question the very basis of the process here, given that the 9/11 suspects will be tried not in civilian courts, but military commissions, suggesting they cannot be accused of committing war crimes because there was no war, and as such, a military commission is not appropriate. The question of torture, the issue of torture, and the US authorities' secrecy about its use also continues to cast a long shadow over proceedings, with arguments about what evidence is admissible given what the defendants were subjected to at Guantanamo Bay and so-called black sites elsewhere. "There is no way to have a fair trial at this point if we are going to continue this charade," says Ammar al-Baluchi's lawyer, Alka Pradhan. "We have hundreds of motions still pending, all because the government at every juncture has said they are not going to give us basic information about where the guys were held, who talked to them, what questions were they asked, and in what way," she says. It is exasperating for the families of victims of the attacks that progress continues to be so slow 20 years after the attacks. "The United States is not on trial. The terrorists are," says Elizabeth Berry after the end of the final pre-trial session of the week. I get frustrated, especially when I hear that we've lost family members who've never seen, have never had resolution to this. But I'm optimistic because we've started again and we're moving forward. Subscribe for more updates. Thanks for watching.